All right, well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Art of Awesomeness podcast. I'm your host, Adrian Kiswani, and this is episode 79. We're getting up there. We do, of course, have the first order of business, which is Happy National Encourage a Young Writer Day. So if you know a young writer, I guess encourage them, could give them a little nudge. Happy National Cinnamon Crescent Day. I'm actually kind of curious what that is. I'm gonna see what that is all about. Okay, so it's just it's a pastry where that looks like a cinnamon roll that's like rolled up like a croissant, looks like. I don't know. So if you're into that, check that out. Happy National Farm Animals Day and National Siblings Day. So if you have siblings, you know. All right. So this topic that we have for the episode today is going to be one that is kind of inspired by one of our guests, actually, that we had on the podcast, Mr. Campos. And he didn't say this, at least I don't think that we covered this when we had him on the podcast. I forget which episode, but I don't know if we covered it. But in private conversation with Christian and I remember him telling us one time about the quote unquote nothing years, that these nothing years were the ages between the ages of 19 and 20. Because 18 is kind of a milestone for a lot of people, 21 is kind of a milestone for a lot of people, but he said that the nothing years were kind of 19, 20 years old, which is conveniently where I am, and I know you listeners are right now, or at the very least you may be approaching these years, if anything. And it was kind of said as a joke. It wasn't really anything that was that any of us kind of took too seriously, but there was a bit of a grain of truth to it. Your life is marked up in certain milestones for a lot of people, and there is some kind of gray area downtime that not a whole lot of people know what to do with. Now, these nothing years, as he said, were sometimes, I forget who said it, but I think someone else also called them the suffering years, depending on how well you deal with these nothing years, which again is all arbitrary anyway. It's just kind of a joke. But at least from what I can tell from my peers and people about my age, sometimes people struggle with these years and aren't exactly maybe where they would like to be in their life at this time, which I've definitely found myself in that position plenty of times. I know plenty of my friends who have been put in those positions and are currently in those positions. So this video is kind of for those people who maybe are in the nothing year stages of their life, whatever that means. And I have a bit of a list here that I wrote down on my phone, just a few quick pointers that I wrote down kind of in the moment. I had the idea for this podcast and I just kind of spewed out a few points, and I'm going to kind of go over them a little bit. And the first of these, I guess there's no real particular order. I was going to kind of rank them from what I thought was most important to least important. But now that I look at it, they're all pretty important equally, in my opinion. So I'm just going to do them in random order. I guess it doesn't really matter. Anyways, first being what you should do with your nothing years, right? 1920 or whatever the nothing years are to you, is set up useful habits. And the reason that I bring this up is because, generally speaking, the time in between milestones, the times in between, larger chapters of your life, for lack of a better word, there's a lot of downtime that a lot of us don't really utilize. I know that obviously people have their hobbies and people have their ways to kind of pass the time. But let's be frank, a lot of us don't necessarily use the time that we have to our fullest advantage, right? And, a lot of that might just be because we don't really know what to do with that time. We're kind of stuck in between deciding what's worthwhile to do and what isn't worthwhile to do, because we're still kind of figuring out what we're passionate about or what really we care about doing with our lives, right? Which is a pretty big question to have to answer early on, which is why it typically changes for people throughout their life. And people kind of emphasize not to try and have everything figured out, when you're super young, because the fact of the matter is life is going to change and you're going to have to change with it. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to compromise your goals or anything like that, but it does mean that things typically aren't going to fall the way you expect them to, right? So a way to kind of help build a wall or a shield against life's ever-changing uncertainty would just be to set up good, solid routines and habits, right? Because if life gets a little bit shaky, you're always going to have some good habits and good routines to kind of fall back on. So at least you know certain things that you can always kind of go back to get grounded or get just a little bit more squared away, right? In times where maybe life is not that. And so an example of this that, is I found very useful in recent weeks is simply setting a set time to go to bed and a set time to wake up. Now, regardless of what those times are, as long as you actually stick to those times, you're going to feel a lot better about your day and about your whole week in general, your whole life when it's structured around a certain parameters of being awake and being asleep. It helped. I mean, there's a whole bunch of scientific benefits of it, such as, it manages your circadian rhythm for anyone who knows anything about that. But the real basic principle of it is you want to give your body routine. You don't want to put your body through unnecessary huge fluctuations throughout the week, right? One day you wake up at 6:30 in the morning, but then you go to bed at like 3 a.m. and then you wake up at 11 in the morning. You don't want these huge fluctuations in your sleep patterns and really just your daily routines and patterns in general. You want to try and in this time figure out what works and what doesn't as far as setting certain routines and habits for yourself. So, like, for example, one habit of mine that I've implemented as of recently, which I would recommend everyone to do, to be honest, but I read either a small book, like one of the epistles, or a minor prophets book, or at the very least about 5 chapters of a larger book in the Bible every morning when I get up. So whenever I get up in the morning, the first thing I do upon, getting up is I turn over to my bedside stand, which is this little thing right here. As you can see, my Bible right there. I pick that thing up and I read it every single day. And it kind of sharpens my mind a little bit in the morning because immediately I'm getting some wisdom. Immediately I'm acknowledging the important thing in life, right? I'm putting that first at the first step of the day. And it's going to give you some wisdom and some good principles to kind of think on and meditate on throughout the day, right? So for example, today I just read the book Philemon, right, in the Bible. The other day I just read 2 Thessalonians, and before that 1 Thessalonians, short books. And, if you read 5 chapters of a larger book, like, I don't know, Leviticus or Daniel, something like that, Revelation, Matthew, if you're reading maybe like 5 chapters of any one of these books, that's very, very doable in the morning or at night. I tend to prefer the morning just because I like to start off my day with something positive, something good, instead of starting it off with, I remember sometimes in times past, I would open my phone in the morning and the first thing I would see is like a news feed of like just to all the stuff in politics and riots and COVID and all these things that immediately when I get up in the morning, I don't want to have to see these things. They're just meaningless noise and, social media and news outlets, that really is not helping anything. It's not helping you get up and start the day on the right foot, right? It's just giving you a bunch of reasons to, I don't know, make excuses and be sad or whatever. So starting off your day right with something is just kind of an example that I've kind of recently implemented. Making sure that there's like a set time, right? Because, throughout the past few years, I've read the Bible on a relatively consistent basis. However, I didn't really have a certain set time of the day that I would read it, right? It would just kind of be like, oh, if I have a chance here, I'll read it. Or like in high school, I would listen to it on audio when I'm walking down the halls or something like that, just kind of whenever I had the time. And it's not bad to do that, whenever you have the time to do something productive, I say do it. But there is something very kind of satisfying about being able to check that off your list right when you wake up in the morning. It's like, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about this important thing later, right? Because in my opinion, it's an important part of the day to read the Bible. So if I get that out right when I wake up, right at the beginning of the day, it's not weighing on me, at 9 o'clock, as I'm winding down for the day, like, oh man, I didn't read anything yet, right? So that's just an example, but I would say that for formative years of your life, I think it is beneficial to experiment and see what kind of habits and routines that you can implement that would kind of better yourself. And look, just making a routine in general, making a basic outline is just good across the board. If you have a set time to go to bed roughly and a set time to wake up roughly, and you stick to those, your whole life is going to feel a whole lot more grounded and not as turbulent, right? One of the biggest causes of what a lot of people feel like anxiety, depression, stress, it comes from a certain bit of turbulence in your life that is disturbing relative peace, right? So giving yourself these little markers or giving yourself these little routines and habits that instill peace and instill soundness of mind and instill good, positive things, that's going to help you get through any kind of on a rough patches or nothing years, as they say, right? As Mr. Campos puts it. Which again, just to clarify, is kind of like an arbitrary thing, right? 1920. I'm not saying that, at any point in your life, it's good to make sure that you're implementing good habits and good routines and stuff like that. So I'm not saying it's just limited to these years, but for a lot of young people, I know a lot of people who tune into this podcast are about my age, if not a little bit younger, a little bit older. And, it pays to early on kind of get something squared away. You're always going to learn throughout life. You're always going to change and adapt to things. But if you can set yourself up a good routine and good habits early on, it's typically going to pay off the farther you go down the road. So I would recommend those things. I think that they're definitely beneficial, especially if you're, maybe currently going through a rough patch. Making sure that you have some good routines and habits to kind of fall back on, I think is beneficial. I've definitely seen benefits in the lives of those around me and my own life. So from personal experience, I can say it's beneficial, and really it's just kind of common sense. But sometimes, even though stuff makes sense, we have to hear people say it over and over again before we get it. So that's why I'm kind of beating a dead horse here. But yeah, that's step one of how to deal with the nothing years. Step two, or bit of advice number two, is to learn from people that are smarter than you, not from you. Learn from people that are smarter than you. And some of us kind of feel like we're getting this out of the way by maybe doing college or something like that, or having a job or things of that nature. Like, well, it's like, well, I take classes every week, so yeah, I'm learning from people smarter than me. But it really kind of, it depends on the situation. There are definitely good professors out there. There are good bosses. There are, no matter what kind of path you're going down, there's always going to be some kind of good mentor figure. But sometimes, we can have a mediocre or even bad teacher, and we can kind of write it off and say, well, I'm still getting mentored by somebody, right? The Bible, I'm paraphrasing this because I don't have the quote exactly memorized, still working on it, but a paraphrased quote in the Bible is that the student will be like his teacher, right? The student will be like his teacher in the sense that whoever's teaching you and instructing you and mentoring you, you're going to end up like that person. So if you're just kind of blindly accepting, legitimate, serious instruction and mentorship from someone who you think is bad, or from someone who you think is wrong about something, or someone who is is maybe leading others down a wrong path, or what they're teaching isn't productive, if you're spending your time around, unproductive teachers and mentors, you're going to end up like them, because the student will become like his teacher, right? So with that statement, is kind of like a guiding force. What you want to do is you want to make sure that your teachers or your mentors or the people who you're learning from and you're gaining insight from are people who are smarter than you, and people who clearly have made good decisions and are saying true things, right? That's what you want. You want to make sure that you're actually getting advice from people who are not dumber than you, for lack of a better word. Now, there is that philosophy that you can always learn from anyone, right? No matter how intelligent or wise they are, you can always learn from someone. Like, you might say, even from the most, someone who's failed at everything in life, you can still technically learn from them, because you can say, oh, here are all the failures they made, here are all the mistakes, so I can just not do those things, right? So you can kind of learn from seeing other people's mistakes. And so in that sense, you can learn from people who are, making worse life decisions than you, or something like that. But and while there's truth in that, and that's absolutely true, I would say it is still better to make sure that you surround yourself with people who are smarter than you for the most part, because you're going to want to emulate those people, and those people are going to want to kind of bring you up and teach you what they know, right? A good teacher wants to share the knowledge that they have. They're not keeping it under lock and key. They're trying to throw information out there, and there are plenty of people, right, who are constantly dishing out great information, right? Books are a great example of this, right? People throughout history who had incredible life experiences. Like, there was this one book I read called Swimming to Freedom by Kent Wong. And it was his escape from mainland China to Hong Kong, and him, swimming this incredible distance to escape, and his life in communist China and things of that nature. I read that book. It's a great book, by the way, if you want to read it. It's called Swimming to Freedom. But, there are so many good mentors out there, and people who have lived through crazy experiences that have written whole books, right, for you to read, to learn what it took maybe a lifetime for them to learn, right? So someone might have spent a lifetime learning something to write into a 200, 300 page book. And all you have to do is read that book in a week, and you can gain that knowledge essentially without having to actually live what they lived, right? Or go through what they go through just to learn what they ultimately learned, right? So my biggest piece of advice would be to learn from people who are smarter than you. And if you're kind of scratching your head thinking, well, maybe I don't know that many people, or a lot of the people who I surround myself with maybe aren't necessarily who I'd like to be emulating, read good books from good people who have good things to say, and you're going to learn from them, and they can be your mentors, right? So there's never really a shortage of mentors, even if there aren't any physical people in your life who are good mentors, because you can always go to the library or even download, ebooks and stuff like that of people who have a lot of really good things to say. Bible being obviously the paramount one, right? But there are tons of other good books about just every topic you can imagine. So get smarter by surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you and who are aiming upwards in life and not aiming downwards, I think would be the biggest thing there. And, I kind of put this as a third point, but I'm going to kind of just clump it in with this one because they're pretty similar and I don't really feel like differentiating it that much. But surround yourself with good people who are trying to uplift you instead of bring you down, right? It's you hear it all the time on those like cheesy, Instagram posts of like people, I don't know, those success Instagrams of just millionaires trying to tell people how to make money and stuff. But there is truth, a huge amount of truth in trying to surround yourself with the right kind of people. And, what I just kind of said right there was surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, but even people maybe who aren't technically as smart as you, right? Right. If you take an IQ test or something like that, and maybe your IQ is a bit higher or something, even if they're not as smart as you, if they're aiming up in life, right, and they're actually they're taking action in trying to improve their life and to improve the lives of those around them, maybe they're not that smart, right? But they're actively taking steps to get smarter, right? And to get stronger and to find better success, right? And to improve the relationships with those around them. If that's the case, if they're aiming up and not down, then go along the ride with them, join people, form groups and coalitions with people. Coalition sounds like a bad word for some reason, but I don't know. That are aiming up in life, and make sure that you surround yourself with those kinds of people. And I just kind of throw that on because I was gonna, for some reason, make that a separate point, but I realized that they're kind of in the same boat, so I just kind of lump those two together. But yeah, there's that. So the third one, the third point that I've written down is essentially the opposite of the previous one. And that is, don't follow the droves to their demise. Because, I mean, you've heard it said, if your friend jumped off a bridge, would you do it? Right. And, sometimes it kind of goes both ways, right? Because it's like, well, if your friend is doing something super successful, would you do it too? It's like, well, yeah, probably, if it's working out for them. But if they're doing something that's bad, that's not working out for them, don't follow them down that path. And I see this, I've seen this with a few people, especially outside of high school. And it kind of applies more specific to these maybe nothing years, as they say, Mr. Campos. And that is, right outside of high school, typically people try to cling on to the relationships that they formed in high school. And, someone will stick around with someone or maintain relations with someone who they know is aiming down, who they know is going off in a bad direction, let's say. But they're essentially still going to hang out with them and give them their time and their energy because, well, it's for old time's sake, right? We knew each other in high school. We knew each other when we were kids. And so, what should be different now? And so a lot of people about my age, I see, unfortunately, kind of get trapped into that whole, they feel bad about moving on and finding better friends than the ones that they were with in high school, just because they have that kind of nostalgia factor of like, well, I remember all those good times in high school and stuff like that. And you kind of, but as you get older, I feel like you have to really evaluate the people that you associate with and the people who you spend your time with and your energy and your resources to. And, in our culture, I'm not going to delve too deep into it because there are plenty of different avenues I could go down. But our culture today is not a very good one overall, I would say. I think that there are a lot of things here in the States, in the West in general, I guess you could say all over the world. But, in terms of social media and the news and stuff like that, and celebrities and Hollywood, I think there's a lot of nonsense and garbage out there that people just blindly follow because, I don't know, it's what they grew up on, or, they're just kind of addicted to the little dopamine hits they get from using social media. And they just become engrossed in celebrity gossip, and they become engrossed in meaningless politics, and they become engrossed in just whatever's new in the world, right? Whether it be a war in Russia and Ukraine and stuff like that, or whether it be Bitcoin or Will Smith slapping somebody. Like, there are a lot of things that can sweep you up in social media and get you super fired up and super, on about this one thing, that it can really just bring you into a whirlwind of internet warriors, typing away on their keyboards or tapping away at their phones, just getting lost in a bunch of meaningless stuff, that I don't want to say that everything is meaningless, but there is a lot of fluff in the world, especially on social media, especially in news outlets. There's a lot of fluff, and there's a lot of things that are distracting people from the real, genuine, basic issues and problems that probably should be addressed, that probably aren't as large scale as you think, but are probably more associated with things that you can do and implement in your life to improve yourself. Like a trend I see constantly is, people are trying to solve worldwide problems, like on TikToks and stuff like that. Like, do this, we'll save the planet. Do this, and corruption will cease. Do this, racism's not a thing anymore. And there are people who are trying to actively try and just completely, utterly change the world. And there's a really famous quote that I like, and it goes something along the lines of, when I was young, I wanted to change the world, right? But when you were young, you were kind of naive and you didn't have everything put together. And when this individual got older, they said, I desired to change myself, right? Because at the end of the day, one of the best steps you can actually do in changing the world, quote unquote, or the world that you live in, is to actually change and make improvements to yourself, right? So there's that famous statement by Jordan Peterson, you want to kind of, he phrases it in a way where it's like, you want to change the world, but you have a messy room. It's like, how do you expect to sort out the whole world or the government if you can't even sort out your own home, or you can't even sort out your own relationships, And there's so much truth in that, but I don't hear many people saying that, right? Because again, there's plenty of rabbit holes I could go down on that, on, I guess, many particular issues. But the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of people, again, droves of people, who are going straight down these roads of kind of I don't want to say meaningless, but fluff is honestly the best word that comes to mind. That's distracting and kind of moving them away from actual important issues that could actually make good, positive impacts and changes. And so don't follow those droves. If you see a bunch of people hopping on a trend, it's kind of my rule of thumb. Before I hop on a trend or something like that, I wait it out. Whenever people hop on an issue and hop on a topic and everyone's giving their hot takes, I typically wait it out and see, what I think about a situation after I've ate a meal, slept on it, read my Bible, thought about it a bit, right? Instead of just immediately emotionally, reacting to something like, I was just talking about this at the dinner table with my family, whenever Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, I could make an episode about that, right? I could make an episode of like, why I disagree, why he did that and all this stuff and whatever, and why Jada Pinkett Smith is a lunatic. But like, at the end of the day, I don't feel as though that means much of anything. A lot of people think that's just the biggest deal. And of course, everyone talked about it, right? It was the slap heard around the world, as they said. But when you actually think about what it is, it's a very small interaction, right? Someone slapping someone else. How many people get slapped on a daily basis on planet Earth, and it's not a big deal, right? It's just, oh yeah, somebody, so-and-so got slapped, or someone slapped their kid somewhere, and that's that. It's weird what gets really conflated, and it's weird what doesn't get talked about. And so oftentimes things are very lopsided, things are very backwards and upside down, again, especially in social media and stuff like that. So detach yourself from those things, detox from them. If you feel like Instagram is just a place where it doesn't bring you any kind of sense of purpose or joy, and it's just bringing you down whenever you see people posting stories of how bad their life is or how terrible the world is, there's this really great feature called Delete app, right? And you can hold down the app of Instagram on your phone, and there's an option that says delete. You can do that. You can also put your social media in an obscure folder and not look at them, right? But we have this kind of compulsion to want to like check into those things because we think we're missing out on stuff. And, the droves are doing their thing on social media. Everyone's rallying about this thing. And it's like, well, I don't want to be in the dark, or I don't want to miss out, but you're really not missing out on anything. You're really just saving yourself and sparing yourself the nonsense that is, certain politics or Hollywood or celebrities and new movements and stuff like that. It's good to be informed. It's good to know things, but to a certain extent, you have to know when to limit the amount of input, feeding into your brain at one point, because at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, wow, I just saw all this stuff about COVID and about Russia and about Will Smith. And it's like, from a social media perspective, the world is constantly falling apart, right? When in reality, your life might be just fine. It might be just okay. But the viewpoint of social media, the news, is making it seem like the world is just in a perpetual state of just ultimate disaster and destruction. When your life might not even reflect that, but you're still going to carry that weight because you're constantly getting this input that really isn't that necessary. So, stay away from droves of people who are just throwing themselves into a pit of sorts, and make sure that you detach and distance yourself from unhealthy forms of input. And, I would say for most people, that's social media. I know it depends on the situation, but, or another example, if you are in a college or something like that, and your college has a big, like, unhealthy partying and drinking scene, and a bunch of kids are throwing away their time and their energy just partying and getting drunk and wasted, you don't have to follow down that path. You can actually decide to go to bed at a decent time and wake up early and get stuff done, and not just throw your time, energy, and life away doing, stuff that you don't want to do, right? Just because the masses are doing something, just because tons of people do something, doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing, right? So if you are at the point where you're like, yeah, I know a lot of people are doing this, but I don't think it's right, stand your ground. If you don't want to do something, and just because even if the whole world is like, bro, you're an idiot for not coming to party, and you're an idiot for not caring about Will Smith, or you're an idiot for not paying too much attention to Russia or something like that. If the world hates you for whatever your convictions are, but they are your sound convictions, then stick to them, and don't waste your time just beating yourself against all of the world's issues and all of the world's problems as if you have to solve them all. Because the fact of the matter is you don't, and you won't, right? So focus on actually putting your own life together before you go about trying to change everyone's lives worldwide, right? I would say that's a good place to start. And the final thing, the fourth thing, again, kind of fits into this, is that be okay with being a bit of an outcast. Be okay with being contrary if that's what needs to happen, right? If the whole world is going down a dark and evil path, it might not be the easiest decision, but you have the power to be like, no, I'm going to keep doing what I think is the right thing, even if the whole world decides not, right? I guarantee you, in Nazi Germany, there were plenty of Germans who did not agree with the Third Reich, but they went along with it anyways, or some of them actually did, rebel, and they were killed or put in camps or whatever, where they fled all Europe altogether, which I know a lot of them did. But there are plenty of instances throughout history, where droves of people went the complete opposite way of the truth, and what's right and what's good. And there was a small minority of people who said, no, we don't buy that. We're going to keep doing what's right. It might be contrary to the culture, so to speak, but we're going to keep upholding what's true, right? And hey, a lot of those people got persecuted for it, killed for it even. And if being truthful and being honest and being real makes you an outcast, then be proud being an outcast then, because I'd far rather, and I'd hope that you'd far rather, uphold truth and honesty and justice over, lies and hypocrisies just because everyone else is following them blindly, right? Or maybe not blindly, depends. But yeah, that's kind of those are some points that I wrote down as far as how to deal with the nothing years and kind of just how to put your life together a little bit when maybe the rest of the world is not looking too bright in your eyes, right? So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this motivated you just a little bit, gave you some things to think about. Maybe you knew these things, but I know that sometimes people need little refreshers here and there. And so hopefully I was able to provide that for you. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you were able to gain something from it. We do, of course, have the verse of the day, and that's going to be Proverbs 29:23. And that reads, "A man's pride shall bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in spirit," which is a pretty self-explanatory verse, but it's a good verse. And if you're wondering where I get some of these verses, there's a good, if you're one of those people who are like, "No, man, I know social media is bad, but I can't delete my Instagram, man. Instagram's too good." Sure. But if that's you and you want some good stuff coming up in your Instagram feed, there is a Instagram account called the King James Bible Verses. That's all it is, all lowercase King James Bible Verses. And they post verses all the time. I mean, they have just, I can scroll for days of just verse after verse after verse. And they have like one verse kind of lines that they have like a paragraph post, and then they have like a chapter post, or close to it anyways. But it's a good page to follow if you're looking for any good Bible content in your feed, because I know sometimes Instagram feeds aren't the most helpful or nice to look upon. So if you want some good info coming into your Instagram feed, I recommend King James Bible Verses, which I've liked them. It's nice to see a couple verses pop up in your Instagram feed every once in a while. It's a nice thing to see. So I don't own this account. I don't even know who this person is. I'm not affiliated with them. So you can just follow them if you want to. I'm not saying it's a must or anything, but I like it. I think they put out some good content. But yeah, with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. This is episode 79. So we're coming up on episode 80. We're about to get in the 80s, guys. And yeah, thank you for watching this episode of the Art of Awesomeness podcast. I really appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned and take care.